At what point does Intel become interesting as an investment opportunity when the government seems to be backing it so hard?
Well, clearly the government is changing the game for Intel, but their challenges remain, and their challenges are on the innovation side. Their design plus manufacturing has run into trouble over the past few years, so much so that they've lost a lot of market share to AMD, and they failed to become a player in the AI advanced chips. No amount of government investment is going to make their engineers smarter or necessarily speed up innovation. Now, throwing money at innovation means they can hire better people, right? So there might be some room to believe that their pace of innovation could improve from here. But they seem to have a long way to go. Having potential customers on the sidelines, whether that's an NVIDIA or an Apple or others, will certainly encourage investors to take a harder look. But right now, an awful lot of assumed outcomes are built into the price of the stock.
Right.
So it's not something we're enthusiastic about.
JoAnne, you know this industry. You have a deep history of covering semiconductors. You also know the names and the players behind the scenes, right? When this story broke, what was your interpretation? This is Intel going out there and shopping itself to try and save itself, or this is some kind of savvy and smart strategic play by Lip-Bu Tan?
Well, I think Intel has for a while been trying to find customers for its foundry plant. And we saw Pat Gelsinger do that earlier, and he was trying to build the fabs ahead of having customers. Lip-Bu Tan obviously is taking a more cautious approach, which I think investors welcome. The government money will help them maybe bridge the gap between getting those fabs up and running and having customers. I think it's smart. They should be talking to everybody that wants to diversify away from TSMC. For a long time, the geopolitical situation was fairly stable. I think now there are greater risks to that political situation and relying just on TSMC, even if it does have some manufacturing here in the United States.
Lip-Bu Tan's real words were, I'm not going to build it and then wait for them to come. They've got to come and then I'm going to build it. So there is, and then the White House jumped in. It is so much the national security focus, not only because, of course, one of the key plants that Intel was originally going to be focusing in on was in Ohio, and we know who's really rather focused on Ohio too, the VP. All of this, though, do you think the US can become a domestic chip-making champion without TSMC, without Samsung?
You know, Caroline, that's yet to be determined. Intel was a U.S. manufacturing champion until they sort of went off the rails with some, poor decisions on which direction to focus for chip manufacturing recipe development. They went down one path, TSMC went down another. TSMC was right, Intel was wrong. And now they're trying to make up for that. And it's going to take time. And I think it's appropriate for potential customers to take a look at Intel, even if it's not this year or next year that they can be used, but even if it's 5 years from now. In chip design, you have to work with your manufacturer because the design details depend on the manufacturing recipe. So they need to start working together now, even if it's for manufacturing 5 years from now. So there's hope for Intel, but it's a little early, I think, to be assuming that they're going to be successful in this.
JoAnne, I think I want to talk a little bit about the Apple side of this situation. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think Advisors Capital has like, let's say, 1 million shares of Apple across its different funds, right? And the reporting was really clear. This is Intel going to Apple, who bought the modem business from Intel in 2019 anyway, and saying to them, like, you want to invest? Like, help us out. But Apple does so much of its own work in silicon. Like, do you see a rationale for Apple to be like, yeah, you know what, let's do this?
Yeah, we have owned Apple for a long time for our clients across various strategies, some conservative, some more aggressive. But Apple is doing the smart thing here. And first of all, we don't know if these talks are actually happening. We don't know if they're going to advance. But from Apple's perspective, it's no longer about the design of components for its iPhones and its Macs. I would expect that this to be more about manufacturing. This potentially is a move for Apple to become diversified away from entire reliance on Taiwan Semiconductor and to have a second manufacturer. They love to have second suppliers. They haven't been able to because Intel has been so far behind. If the belief now is that with government subsidies and government investments that Intel will have the time it takes to modify their manufacturing recipe and be able to roll out at capacity, product for Apple, NVIDIA, who knows who else. That would be very appealing, I would think, to Apple.
Intel was founded in the 60s, right? And we're in a very different situation today. In 1997, Microsoft bailed out Apple. Funny things happen in technology. In your career, this NVIDIA announcement with Intel and now the reporting on Apple, are these things that you see coming?
Well, we already saw that Intel had received a massive subsidy under the previous administration's CHIP Act. So we knew Intel was getting this money. What's different now is this administration has decided to turn the subsidy into an ownership stake, which brings some returns back to the taxpayer. But also, I think the second shoe to drop, potentially, are incentives for potential customers of Intel to help Intel get to that point where they have manufacturing that's competitive with Taiwan Semiconductor. That's what's really changed today, is the incentives circling around the whole industry to try to build up that domestic manufacturing. And that's a big change.
I have to say, as an investor, you look at what happened with Lithium Americas yesterday. The US reported to be looking at a stake in that company. The shares rocket 90%. The fact that they take a 10% stake in Intel and suddenly the shares just go up and to the right. Does it have to become part of your fundamental research that when the US government gets involved, it's very hard to bet against that stock or not be involved in it?
Yeah, fortunately, Caroline, we're able to pick and choose stocks. We own, 40 to 50 equity positions in the different strategies. So we can choose not to be involved in companies for which, we think there's significant risk of government involvement, because you just don't know which way it's going to go. And, some of these announcements have been pretty unpredictable. So fortunately, there are plenty of places to invest where you don't have to be directly exposed to government risk. We've owned Broadcom for a long time, since I joined the firm back in 2015.
Yeah.
And they're doing just fine without any government involvement, and they are playing a bigger and bigger role in the AI rollout.
And let's just talk, therefore, about the context of the AI circularity that people have been worrying about, or just more broadly the valuations. However, we are seeing bigger and bigger numbers. Yesterday it was Alibaba saying we think it's going to be $4 trillion by 2030 that goes into the need for AI compute. We do see a space where NVIDIA can win, maybe even AMD can win, where we see custom ASICs win as well. Do you put your bets into all of these names, or do you have to focus in on the key win that thus far has been NVIDIA? Yeah,
I think, Caroline, the way to play this is to recognize that this is a pie that's growing, and that there'll be more and more players that take little slices here and there, and there may be some market share change, right? NVIDIA is bound to lose some market share, not bound to grow less quickly necessarily, but bound to lose some market share. We know AMD has some good processors out there for AI workloads. We know that Broadcom is co-developing with the likes of Google, other ASIC-based processors. So I think there's room for a lot of players to participate. I think the wise investor will be a bit diversified. Don't just pick one, pick a handful. There are startup companies that aren't available to us as public equity investors, but those are worth watching because they could become competition along the lines.
The neoclouds, for example.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have some years to go while this pie continues to expand. At least that's the information we have now. Unfortunately, we don't have great information on how well the applications are turning out and how much money is being made. And that ultimately could sustain data center development in the future. But in the meantime, we also have sovereign wealth funds investing in building out data centers. So there's a lot of room for global growth here.
JoAnne, there are hundreds of billions of dollars committed to build data centers, and we know where the chips are coming from, and we know who's going to lease the capacity. But there are still so many missing pieces, electricity, the main one. I just don't understand if this is like people writing checks they can't cash, in the future, because all the other pieces won't be there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Ed. They're writing checks that nobody will take because there isn't the energy potentially to power the data centers. And that's why I like so much the global spread of this build out. Yes, in the U.S., right, we need to build more, facilities for powering these, and we're seeing the companies themselves get involved, and that might very well be the solution in the U.S. But we're going to need an awful lot more investment, and that's, by the way, why the AI so-called investment theme has spread beyond technology. It's into utilities, it's into even pipeline companies, right? Where is the demand spreading, in addition to the applications? And the global footprint will, I think, be fungible enough to allow the data centers to go where the power and the land is available. And so that's a way also to avoid those bottlenecks.